Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and I just like to keep it real with you guys. I am in a terrible mood, an awful mood. I am going to rage at the Biden administration later in the first hour of the show because contrary to all of the naysayers, all of the Biden apologists, all the people who like to provide cover for the failure of this administration, turns out that Biden absolutely intended to nominate an anti-abortion, right-wing religious zealot to a lifetime judgeship in the state of Kentucky. Oh, there's no vacancy in Kentucky, as if there's no possibility that a federal judge might retire soon, leading the way for a religious zealot like the individual that Biden wanted to nominate, ending up in that seat, in that judgeship. Anyway, I'm already giving you all the details of the story. We'll hold off on that. We'll get to that later. We'll also give you some updates on the tragic and all too common mass shooting that happened over the holiday break. Pretty heartbreaking story involving some of the victims of that shooting and the family members who are now victimized by it. And in the second hour, we will try to lighten things up a little bit. John Iadarola is back from his time off. He will be joining me in the second hour to talk about all sorts of news. We'll lighten things up, but we do have a serious story to get to, including one candidate, a Republican candidate who thinks that we need assault weapons in order to shoot Democrats who are Klansmen. I mean, there's a reason why Republicans want revisionist history and want to do away with any type of history lesson that talks about the reality of slavery and race relations in this country. An ignorant electorate is easy to exploit, easy to take advantage of, and I think that ad is a good example of that. Before we get to all of that though, please like and share the stream. Send us your comments. If you're members, we'll read some of your comments. You can also send us super chats if you're not a member. You can also become a member by going to tyt.com/join, or you can smash that join button if you're watching us on YouTube. Why don't we get to our first story, and let's cross our fingers and hope that I can get through this without getting emotional. A 2-year-old boy lost both his parents in the Highland Park, Illinois mass shooting that took place over the 4th of July holiday break. Aiden McCarthy was found bloodied and wandering alone after the shooting. In fact, when he was initially found, he was right by his father, who was bleeding out from a gunshot wound. So friends and authorities confirmed that the boy's parents, Kevin McCarthy, who is 37 years old, Irina McCarthy, 35, were among 7 people who were killed in this mass shooting. The little boy, Aiden, again 2 years old, was later reunited with his grandparents. His mother's parents will be taking care of him now that he doesn't have his own parents because they were shot and killed in yet another mass shooting in this country. And Aiden isn't unique. There are many people in this country who have lost their own children, who have lost their parents, who have lost their loved ones as a result of the so-called pro-life individuals in this country feeling that their little gun hobby is way more important than human lives. And by the way, literally no one is calling for a ban on guns, no one. So not only is their little gun hobby more important than human lives, not only is their gun hobby more important than the lives of these 2 parents that are now gone, okay? They just can't be inconvenienced with something like a background check. They can't be inconvenienced with things like, red flag laws to ensure that the severely mentally ill who might carry out these random acts of violence don't get their hands on a lethal weapon. They don't want to be inconvenienced. They don't want to be inconvenienced. Because fact of the matter is, no one had a discussion, no one's engaging in a debate about banning guns. We're having a conversation about common sense laws that will, in the very least, minimize the occurrences, the mass murders that we're experiencing on a daily basis. But they can't be inconvenienced by that. They can't. By the way, they want to tell you what you can and can't do with your body because they're supposedly pro-life. Garbage. And I'm sick of journalists taking what they say at face value and not calling them out on their hypocrisy when they claim they care about the lives of zygotes, but don't give a damn about living, breathing, Bible outside the womb human beings who are being gunned down in this country on a daily basis just so they can enjoy their little hobby. Just so they can enjoy their hobby with no inconveniences. So Lauren Silva found 2-year-old Aiden. My boyfriend handed me this little boy and said he was underneath his father who was shot in the leg. They were trying to stop the bleeding, so I brought the boy downstairs into the garage. Aiden was protected from the gunfire by Kevin's body. Even as the man lay wounded, Irina's father and Aiden's grandfather said. So here's 2-year-old Aiden, who doesn't have parents anymore because the right-wing, disgusting zealots in this country don't care about his parents. They don't care about Aiden's life. They don't care about living in a country that's actually safe and free. There's Irina and Kevin McCarthy. There's a GoFundMe fundraiser to raise money to help support Aiden, to help support his grandparents who will now be raising him. And if you would like to contribute to it, you can go to GoFundMe, and we'll provide a link for this fundraiser in the description box for the story. So apparently when they first found him, the little boy was asking for his parents. He kept asking, "Are mom and dad coming back soon?" And he kept saying the same thing to his grandfather. When I picked him up, he said, "Are mommy and daddy coming soon?" He doesn't understand. We are living in hell right now. This country is a disgrace. The leadership in this country, yes, I'm talking about Democratic leadership because they are in charge after all, disgrace. Republicans are part of a massive death cult in this country. They proved it to us during this lengthy pandemic when they were unwilling to do the bare minimum to keep themselves, their loved ones, and their community safe from a highly contagious and lethal virus. They've proven it to us when they continued pushing the use of pharmaceutical drugs to treat COVID when there was no scientific evidence indicating that it did in fact effectively treat COVID. We experienced it as they refused to wear masks. We experienced it as they refused to even entertain a conversation about common sense gun control. I believe in the right to bear arms. It is in our Constitution. I believe in having a weapon to protect yourself. I've talked about that on this show. I'm not an advocate for banning guns. I am an advocate for legislation, for laws that can help prevent the kind of mass shooting that the people in Highland Park, Illinois experienced over the 4th of July weekend. I'm a proponent of doing what's necessary to keep parents alive so they can raise their own children. So we don't have 2-year-old orphans running around. That's what I'm a proponent of. I'm a proponent of actual freedom, actual liberty. I'm a proponent of what this country was supposed to stand for, despite the fact that we have well-funded, right-wing organizations in this country that have slowly but surely chipped away at everything that this country was supposed to be about, everything that was supposed to make this country great. I know I'm all over the place with my commentary here, but I mean, what else is there left to say? They're doing what they can to burn books, to silence teachers, to censor social studies and history curriculum so they can rewrite history to their advantage and pretend like we're all morons and we don't know what's going on. As if we don't understand that there is one very specific group of people in this country who have shown us time and time again that their hobbies, that corporate profits, that pretty much everything that they value will take priority over human lives. Little Aiden's life was destroyed that day. And while the right wing pretends to care about babies, they pretend to care about, oh, the precious babies, the precious babies. That's why we need to be authoritarians and take control over women's bodies, those precious babies. You don't care about babies. The right wing doesn't care about babies at all. They don't care about human lives. They will watch you wither away, suffer, waste away on the streets with your entire family suffering from extreme poverty. And they'll point to you and be like, bootstraps, where are your bootstraps? Learn to use those bootstraps. We have endless gun deaths in this country, and they don't care. They don't care. They don't care about any of us. And I'm sick of the fact, sick to my stomach, that all we have as a line of defense to protect us from these monsters in this country is Sleepy Joe Biden. Homeboy couldn't even be bothered to visit Illinois. He sent Kamala Harris, gotta take my nap. Too busy scheming with Mitch McConnell to provide a lifetime judgeship to an anti-choice right-wing zealot in Kentucky. That's what Joe Biden's up to. That's the Democratic leadership that's supposed to protect us from the authoritarians, from all the death, all the pain, all the suffering that's very intentionally implemented upon all of us by the right wing in this country. I do this show every day, and I'm supposed to come on screen and pretend like I'm some sort of robot with no emotion. I'm supposed to read about a 2-year-old boy who is an orphan now and pretend like, no, I'm just here to give you the news. I'm just here to give you the facts of the story. And let's move it along. What's the next story? What's the next issue? Ooh, news cycle's always moving. This country's broken. It's an embarrassment. And every time someone says exactly what I just said right now, you have right wingers up in arms. You have Republicans up in arms. How dare they say that this country is not great? This country is not great. We are a laughing stock. We are an embarrassment on the international stage. We aggressively support policies that kill members of our own communities. That is what this country is about. Half of it is part of a death cult. The other half is just weak, embarrassing, pathetic, lays down and lets all this happen. That is what America is. Ain't nothing to be proud about. What are you guys proud about? I want someone to tell me, what are we supposed to be proud about with America and where it's at in this very moment? We're a 2-year-old becoming an orphan as a result of politicians' failure to do the basic minimum, the bare minimum in protecting Americans. Like, are we supposed to be proud of this? How are we supposed to claim that we're living in a free country? Do you feel free when you're afraid for your life every time you're at a public event because a mass shooter could just open fire with no problem? Do you feel free knowing that any lunatic can go to a gun show and buy whatever weapon, however many weapons they want from the back of someone's truck? No background checks, nothing standing in his or her way. But let's keep it real, his way. Let's keep it real, ladies and gentlemen. All the fear mongering about Muslim terrorists in America, how laughable is that? When, I don't know, I feel like every week there's another 20-something white guy who decides I'm depressed, or I'm worried about immigrants, or I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that. So let me just go and murder a bunch of people. Because what's gonna stop him, right? You got Tucker Carlson almost defending the shooter, claiming like, can you blame him? I mean, poor white guy living in an era where all these women are telling him how unfair the world is and how he's a privileged guy. Yeah, it's the women's fault. It's the women's fault that a 22-year-old white guy decided to take the guns that he purchased legally, okay? He purchased guns legally after the cops showed up to his home on 2 different occasions. Once after he threatened to kill himself, once after he claimed he was gonna kill everyone else with his massive inventory of swords and knives. After that, let me repeat, after that, he purchased guns legally and then proceeded to destroy the lives of the individuals who were at that parade in Highland Park, Illinois. What is there to be proud of? Someone tell me. We control people's bodies. We sow hate and division. We overthrow democratically elected leaders in other countries. What is there to be proud of? I'm not proud to be American. I have so much embarrassment in my heart every single day sitting at this desk, sharing these stories with you because this is where I was born. This is my country, this is my identity. And all we do is engage in actions that lead to pain and suffering both within our borders and outside our borders. And then we puff up our chests and pretend like we live in the greatest country in the world. No, we don't. We gotta take a break, we'll be right back. I probably should not have covered that story when it was pitched in our morning meeting, and I couldn't even keep it together then. I thought I would get it together by now, but it's been hard. All right, well, there's a lot more from where that came from, unfortunately. So why don't we get to our next story?
Look at Robert Bobby Crimo. Would you sell a gun to that guy? Does he seem like a nutcase? Of course he does. So why didn't anyone raise an alarm? Well, maybe because he didn't stand out. Maybe because there are a lot of young men in America who suddenly look and act a lot like this guy. It's not an attack, it's just true. Like Crimo, they inhabit a solitary fantasy world of social media, porn, and video games. They're high on government-endorsed weed. Smoke some more, it's good for you. They're numbed by the endless psychotropic drugs that are handed out at every school in the country by crackpots posing as counselors.
I don't know if Tucker Carlson knows this. No, let me pause. Tucker Carlson does know this. School counselors don't have the ability to write prescriptions for psychotropic drugs for teenagers. But who knows, maybe there's an incoming war on school counselors next because the right wing is always looking for their next manufactured culture war. So brace for impact when that comes around. But of course, here's Tucker Carlson blaming social media, which is available in other countries, porn, also available in other countries, video games, definitely available in other countries, marijuana, not only available in other countries, legalized in other countries, and pharmaceutical drugs for the mass shooting that happened in Highland Park, Illinois over the 4th of July weekend. Anything to deflect from our failure as a country to do a damn thing about loose gun laws, easy access to guns by anyone and everyone, including this lunatic who opened fire at this parade in Highland Park, killing 7. Tucker Carlson also has an interesting perspective when it comes to mass shooters in general, but especially when it comes to poor young white men. So why don't we hear more from Tucker Carlson on what he blames all of this on. And if you think what you've already seen is bad, get ready, it's about to get worse.
And of course, they're angry. They know that their lives will not be better than their parents. They'll be worse. That's all but guaranteed. They know that, they're not that stupid.
They're angry. So here's Tucker Carlson engaging in the same faux populism that he typically engages in to signal to his audience that he understands them. You know, he is, of course, incredibly wealthy, sent his kids to boarding schools, which, by the way, let me just keep it real. I know that's a rich person thing, sending your kids to boarding schools. If you don't want to be a parent, then don't have kids. If you don't want to raise your kids, you want to send them off for months at a time, don't have kids. We have enough disturbed minds in the country. We don't need more of them as a result of wealthy parents who don't want to parent having kids and then sending them off for months at a time at boarding schools. Just a side note, But the Swanson heir is trying to signal to his audience that he understands the economic frustrations, the same economic frustrations that he has supported throughout his entire career, that he has pushed for throughout his entire career. He has supported the very politicians who have put corporate profits over the lives and livelihoods of fellow Americans. But don't worry, he understands the frustrations of these poor young white male shooters who decide to open fire and cause mass deaths in this country. He understands. I'm getting real tired of his pretend economic concerns. Okay, but he's building a case here that's essentially trying to provide cover for a mass shooter who, by the way, not only killed 7 people, left a 2-year-old boy by the name of Aiden McCarthy orphaned. Little 2-year-old boy will not get to experience the joys of having his parents with him. There he is, 2-year-old boy, lost both his parents in that shooting. He is now an orphan. But Tucker Carlson understands why someone would open fire, right? I mean, that's kind of the case he's starting to build here. But is it? I don't know, I could be wrong. Let's watch the next video.
And yet the authorities in their lives, mostly women, never stops lecturing them about their so-called privilege. You're male, you're privileged. Imagine that. Try to imagine an unhealthier, unhappier life than that. So a lot of young men in America are going nuts. Are you surprised?
I mean, can you blame all these young men in America who open fire and kill all these innocent people? Can you blame them? It's the women's fault. It's the women, they're nagging the men and they're miserable. So they decide to buy assault weapons and show up to 4th of July parades and slaughter people. Can you blame them? Are you surprised? Tucker Carlson very clearly stating that it's understandable that this happened. It's understandable. What I also love is that he started that segment by claiming, hey, or asking his audience, like, would you sell this guy a gun? I mean, look at him, would you sell this guy a gun? So I don't get it, Tucker. What are you advocating for here? Are you advocating for a policy that would just automatically deny guns to guys who look like the mass shooter in Highland Park, Illinois? So like you wanna go more extreme than red flag laws. Just on face alone, we can deny selling you a gun. Okay, of course he's not calling for that. But how insanely disgraceful and pathetic was that segment? I mean, he's got this past and present. I mean, he still spouts these conspiracy theories about how white people are being replaced in America. And that was the exact conspiracy theory that persuaded another insane person to open fire in Buffalo, New York at a grocery store, gunning down black shoppers because he was paranoid about white replacement. Tucker Carlson seems to want to provide some sort of pipeline. Fox to prison pipeline. He spouts his talking points, his hateful, disgusting rhetoric. He riles up lunatics in the country. They then turn around, open fire, kill innocent people, and then he'll come back on his show and say, I mean, couldn't you guys see this coming? I mean, can you really blame him? The women in his life, am I right? I don't know what situation's going on in his household with his wife. Maybe she's nagging him, maybe he's got some issues there. I don't know, I don't care, okay? To blame what happened in Highland Park, Illinois on anyone or anything other than the fact that the person who opened fire was a lunatic who should not have had access to firearms is absolute BS. I'm not interested in hearing any other argument. This is a guy who had authorities show up to his home on 2 different occasions because he was a threat, because he had threatened to kill himself, and on a different occasion, threatened to kill everyone else with the weapons he had in his room. Cops had to confiscate all of his knives and swords and daggers as a result of that. And then after that happened, he was able to legally buy firearms and planned the shooting that he did, planned another shooting that luckily he was not able to carry out because he was apprehended later after the Highland Park, Illinois shooting. But the point that I'm trying to make here is, it is amazing the extreme lengths that Tucker Carlson is willing to go to avoid ever having to blame the problem that we're facing in this country with mass shootings on guns and the kind of rhetoric we hear from the right wing that sows fear, division, and paranoia among our white fellow Americans, particularly young white men. He encourages a lot of it. So I guess in some ways, I'm not that surprised. But I'm not gonna provide cover for a mass shooter by blaming women in his life when there's absolutely no evidence indicating his rage, his violence was fueled by women. It wasn't. But anything to avoid having to talk about the real problem. Racist rhetoric, unhinged conspiracy theories, poisoning the minds of young men in this country who have easy access to weapons. Tucker Carlson knows what the real cause is. Just trying to distract you from the truth. All right, I hope you guys are ready, because this next story is, I'm done with Joe Biden. I know I've said it a billion times. It is hard to express in a calm way that does not involve cursing. Let's just put it that way. How much this story enrages me. So I'll do my best to get through it. White House had decided to notify Kentucky's Democratic governor, Andy Beshear, that it intended to nominate an anti-choice federal judge in the state of Kentucky. So this is a follow-up on a story that we covered last week when it first broke. And the story involved Joe Biden striking this secret deal with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, meaning Republicans are in the minority. Let's remember that. Biden strikes a deal with McConnell to essentially nominate an anti-choice, right-wing, religious zealot to a federal lifetime judgeship. In return for what? That's actually pretty unclear even in this moment. It was reported that Biden, in return for this appointment, would get Mitch McConnell's word that he wouldn't hold up Biden's other nominees. Wow. Mitch McConnell gave you his word, Biden? So look, there's two possibilities here. Either Biden is so devastatingly stupid that he's not fit to be president of the United States. He's not fit to lead anything, okay? Or he knows exactly what he's doing and he's turning his back on his constituents, on the people who showed up to vote for him, on the people who canvassed for him, on the people who actually believed that he was honest when he was campaigning about the existential threat the Republican Party is. If he really does see the Republican Party as a threat, certainly doesn't look like it based on his actions. So there's confirmation now because CNN was able to obtain an email that was sent by the Biden White House to Andy Beshear's office to notify him, to let him know, listen, we're about to nominate this awful federal judge. So brace for impact. In an email dated June 23rd, White House aide Kathleen Marshall, who works in its Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, wrote to Coulter Minix in Beshear's office that Chad Meredith, that's the anti-choice judge, by the way, was to be nominated tomorrow to the US District Court for the Eastern District of Kentucky. The subject line of the email read, "Close hold." The body of the correspondence included a summary of Meredith's resume. I wonder what CNN didn't provide what the resume said, but I'm curious, what did the resume say? Did it say anything about the fact that Meredith fought to uphold laws that would force women getting abortions to look at the ultrasound of the fetus, and they would also have to listen to a description of the fetus to essentially shame them and make them feel bad about the fact that they were exercising choice over what to do with their own bodies? Did his resume say anything about that? I'm curious. Minix responded the same day, writing in part, "Appreciate the heads up." Now, I want to talk a little bit about the date because that email was sent on June 23rd. June 23rd, what happened after that? June 23rd, a day later, something big happened in the country, right? The new email from the White House dated June 23rd, stating that Biden planned to nominate an anti-abortion Republican to a lifetime appointment judgeship the following day. The day that the Roe ruling ultimately came out appears to further bolster the idea that the White House did not anticipate Roe to be overturned that Friday. How can any Democratic voter look at this sad, pathetic excuse for a leader and think, nailed it? He nailed it, he really did. No, I'm so scared of the Republican Party and I'm so terrified of the fascists that I am going to support a man who carries water for the fascists. Wakey, wakey, Democratic voters. All of the apologists for corporate Democrats who spend all their days on Twitter shaming anyone who dare question the leadership of these pathetic people in the Democratic Party. Wakey, wakey. This is a lifetime judgeship. It's a federal judge. For all the idiots who responded to me by saying, well, it's Kentucky. I mean, the brain rot in this country. It's Kentucky. There's no way a liberal judge would get confirmed in Kentucky. Are you stupid? It's a federal judgeship, which is why the president appoints the individual and the Senate confirms the individual. I don't know if you guys know this, might sound a little crazy. Democrats are in charge in the federal government. Why are we doing favors for turtle man Mitch McConnell? Someone explain that to me. I need to understand. When are blue checkmark libs on Twitter finally gonna get it? They are aiding and abetting the destruction of this country by providing cover for the worst Democratic leadership imaginable. There's more. So remember, they sent this email to Andy Beshear's office one day before Roe is overturned by the Supreme Court, and they were caught off guard. They didn't expect it to happen. They didn't expect, even though they had literally 6 weeks to prepare, they didn't expect it. They didn't expect it. Earlier, CNN had reported White House counsel Dana Remus had assured senior aides that the ruling would not come out on that Friday, amid Democrats' growing frustration about perceived lack of urgency from the Biden White House following the Roe decision. So embarrassing. And after the Supreme Court did exactly what they said they were gonna do, after they did what they warned they were gonna do, looks like the White House got a little scared about the fact that they were about to nominate a terrible judge in a federal appointment for a lifetime judgeship, okay? So in another email dated June 29th, Marshall wrote to the same aide in Beshear's office, Coulter, sorry for not including this in the original email, but I wanted to clarify that the email I sent was pre-decisional and privileged information. Please let me know if you have any questions. In other words, let me just decode that for you. Please don't let this get out to the public or the press because it doesn't look good that the president of the United States, a Democrat, struck a deal with Mitch McConnell to install an anti-choice right-winger to a federal judgeship position in Kentucky. Yeah, it doesn't look so good. Glad we know about it though. Bashir, a Democrat, strongly criticized Biden, saying in a recent news conference, if the president makes that nomination, it is indefensible. I totally agree with you, Andy B. Totally agree with you. Not voting for this guy. Biden should not seek re-election. Biden needs to step aside and allow for someone who actually has interest in leading to do just that. Someone who's not interested in aiding and abetting right-wingers. But look, Biden told us exactly who he was. I mean, he bragged about having a record of concessions to right-wingers in government. Bragged about how he worked with Republicans to prevent, school integration through busing. He bragged about that while he was campaigning. He told us who he was. But all those liberals who were terrified of Bernie Sanders told us to shut up, sit down, because Biden is the only one who can beat Trump. But what's the point of beating Trump if you're aiding and abetting people like him every day in a position of power? In the position of power that you have. Finally, just want to remind you about what Biden said on March 4th, 2020. We need judges who will respect Roe v. Wade as the law, and we need a Congress that will protect reproductive rights. If I'm president, that leadership will start at the top. If that's what leadership looks like for Joe Biden, the only thing he should be leading is his afternoon naps. Go to sleep, leave us alone, make way for someone who actually wants to do the job. This man is a complete and utter disaster. I'm absolutely furious about this. But aside from being furious with Biden, I'm furious for all of the naive individuals who saw that initial story break about this appointment and tried to do everything they could to deny that it was real. Instead of holding him accountable, instead of applying pressure to prevent Biden appointing this person, this anti-choice individual for a lifetime judgeship, they started trying to question the credibility of the news, question the credibility of the reporting. There's no vacancy for a federal judgeship in Kentucky. As if it's impossible for someone to retire and create a vacancy so they can get a younger right-wing zealot in to basically make decisions about our lives for the rest of his working life. Biden is not fit to lead. Democratic leadership needs to go. And I know I'm being harsh on Biden because he deserves it at this moment. But you should take a look at how many federal judges were appointed by Donald Trump and confirmed with the help of Chuck Schumer making deals with Mitch McConnell. Democratic leadership has got to go. And if it doesn't go, there is no way in hell I would support that party. I'm done with them. I don't care. There's no amount of fear mongering about Republicans that can change my mind at this point. Because the whole point of supporting the Democratic Party is that they're supposed to, in the very least, even if they don't do anything real for us, in the very least, they were supposed to stop the bleeding. But they're aiding and abetting the bleeding. Joe Biden's coming in and he's ripping that wound open even more. That's what he's doing with this issue involving this judge. They don't deserve our votes. I want to support the opposition to the Republican Party, but it needs to be the opposition to the Republican Party, not individuals who aid and abet the pain and suffering that the Republican Party aggressively fights for. And that's what Biden does. We got to take a break. I'm going to read some of your comments during our social break, so send them in. And when we come back, we'll also talk a little bit about how Charlie Kirk, a West Point reject, apparently got rejected because he's a moron and doesn't know what our Constitution says. We've got that story and more coming right up. Let's get right to our next story.
There is no separation of church and state. It's a fabrication. It's a fiction. It's not in the Constitution. It's made up by secular humanists.
That was Charlie Kirk showing off why that big brain of his didn't get accepted into West Point. Maybe they rejected him because he doesn't understand what the Constitution says. Maybe didn't even take a single moment to read about it. But let's watch more of that video in context and see if there's any redeeming argument that he makes there.
Well, it's so sick because South American and Central American countries are actually very religious and very Catholic. So they're going into religious countries with almost missionary fervor to go and try to make these countries less religious. And again, there is no separation of church and state. It's a fabrication. It's a fiction. It's not in the Constitution. It's made up by secular humanists. It's derived from a single letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Convention. Of course, we should have church and state mixed together. Our founding fathers believed in that. We can go through the details of that. They established literally a church in Congress. Anyway, separate issue. The point, though, is that this is acting like a religion, though, isn't it? If we live by their own false premise of separation of church and state, then why on earth and how on earth why would they want to go bring this belief to other countries? I mean, they're almost kind of as if it was the 1400s and they're sending missionaries to the New World filled with despotic, nihilistic atheism and humanism. I mean, what's the thought process behind this?
So what is Charlie Kirk talking about there? Well, we'll get back to what the Constitution says in just a moment. Just ripping a page out of Lauren Boebert's book, I guess. Lauren Boebert getting dunked on relentlessly didn't discourage Charlie Kirk from making that stupid point. But before we get to that, what he's referring to is this insane idea that the Biden administration is giving government grants to countries that support atheism, that push for atheism. There is no evidence to that. Looked into the story, the only publication I saw covering it was, of course, Fox News. And there was nothing, not a shred of evidence indicating that the Biden administration, like Biden can't get up from his nap to defend women's reproductive rights. You really think Biden's gonna spend his time like traveling to other countries? Like, yo, buddy, I'm gonna give you some funds if you push atheism in your country. What? I will tell you though, right-wing evangelicals from America love to visit other countries and push for legislation that supports murdering people who don't have lifestyles they agree with. Yeah. Happened in Uganda back in 2012 when right-wing evangelicals who are part of the so-called family, the group that hosts the prayer breakfast, the national prayer breakfast every year, would go to, African countries and push for the death penalty, meaning execution for gay people. They almost got that passed, but there was enough international backlash that they backed off. But there are still penalties for gay people in Uganda. Thanks to evangelicals, who of course Charlie Kirk likes to rub elbows with. So if you want to have that conversation, we can have that conversation. But I'm guessing Charlie Kirk might need a minute or two to just read something before we engage in that. Like, get on my level, Charlie. There's a reason why West Point rejected you. You're lazy, you're tired. And you just regurgitate talking points that you've heard from literally the biggest lunatics in Congress. But look, I'm just name calling here. And when you name call, you automatically lose, right? You automatically lose the argument. So let me come with the receipts, because this person who for some reason can't stop twitching, his face is like a twitch fest. What's going on over here? What are you on? Maybe get off. Maybe read something and then come back on your show and then maybe you can tell us what the Constitution actually says. But if that's too much work for you, Charlie, I can do that for you here. Obviously, there is a separation of church and state. Obviously, that is what the founders of this country wanted. Let me give you some more evidence. I can't believe I have to do this as if we're in like a second grade history lesson. For the revolutionaries, Political liberty was meaningless without religious liberty, and disestablishment, the separation of church and state, was necessary to guarantee freedom of the soul, the most precious of all liberties. Even before the Bill of Rights prohibited a state church, the framers of the Constitution had signaled their radical break with the past by refusing to require office holders to meet a religious test, that is, to subscribe to certain religious beliefs or even to believe at all. Seems counter to what Charlie Kirk said there. Weird. So do I believe what our history says, what our Constitution says, or do I believe some weird-faced twitching guy on some random show who's telling me that there was never a separation of church and state in this country? I don't know. You guys get to decide who's more credible. The Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom in 1786 made clear that the state would not support any churches or Christianity more generally, much less one faith. Thomas Jefferson, proud author of the law, argued that religion must be protected from the state and the state from religion because it was so essential to mankind's happiness and well-being. True religion could spread only by reason and persuasion, never by governmental edict. The First Amendment, Jefferson believed, enshrined this principle by building a wall of separation between church and state. First Amendment, fascinating. So what exactly does the First Amendment say? What does it say, Charlie? Let me give you a little reminder. Or maybe you'll hear this for the first time because maybe you haven't read the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the government deciding that one religion should rule the land is not something that the founders believed in. They didn't think that that was, something that you would have in a society that is free, a society that celebrates liberty. And I'm curious, so in Charlie's mind, what would happen? Okay, he's evangelical. He identifies as evangelical. So is he saying that as an evangelical, the government should force his religion on everyone else, including Jewish people, by the way? What does Ben Shapiro think about that? Hey, Ben, you live in America, no separation of church and state, according to your buddy, Charlie Kirk. So take the yarmulke off, not allowed, not allowed. Charlie gets to decide which religion all of us have to follow. Charlie gets to use his religion to dictate our lives in a country that's supposed to be free. All of this also was confirmed by the Supreme Court in multiple cases, okay? So 2 landmark Supreme Court cases, Cantwell v. Connecticut and Everson v. Board of Education, established free exercise and separation of church and state. I know it's a little weird because right now we have a Supreme Court that's not interested in interpreting the Constitution. They're much more interested in right-wing activism in the nation's highest court. But the original idea around the Supreme Court was that they would protect our constitutional rights. And that is what they did in these 2 very specific Supreme Court rulings, establishing free exercise and separation of church and state, respectively, as part of the liberty protected by the 14th Amendment, 14th Amendment's guarantee of due process of law. By incorporating them into the due process clause, the court allowed for these protections to restrain both state and federal governments. For the justices, these freedoms, like other First Amendment rights, were essential to the democratic process. Without the liberty to discuss, write, believe, and act, Americans could not participate effectively in governing themselves. So listen. You guys can decide for yourselves who's telling you the truth, who's right, who's wrong. You've got Charlie Kirk, who provides no receipts and just spouts nonsense about how there was never a separation of church and state. Or you can believe the argument I'm making, not because I'm pulling things out of my ass like Charlie does, but because I'm quoting the Constitution, giving you a little bit of that history, American history, which right-wingers want to prevent kids from learning in our schools by burning books and censoring certain curriculum they don't like. But if I still haven't made my case, if I'm not persuasive enough, let us remember Charlie Kirk getting confronted by someone who was curious about why Charlie Kirk was really rejected from West Point. So let's go to that confrontation.
My question is for Charlie. Charlie, I wanted to ask you about you trying to get into West Point. You said that you applied to West Point, but they gave your place to an applicant of a different gender and persuasion. I know the test scores and I knew the qualifications. She was less qualified. So my question is, if they were of different gender, do you know what gender they were?
I never said that. That's fake news. Thanks for being here tonight.
Oh, it's fake news. I mean, it's super unfair to accuse Charlie of saying something that he didn't actually say. But did he say it? I don't know. Let's take a look.
Unfortunately, I was waitlisted and things kind of started to get a little bit odd, and I eventually lost my spot out to what I felt was a far less qualified applicant in my district that was of a different gender and a different persuasion. You could take it any way you want, but I knew the test scores, I knew the qualifications. I was kind of got the short end of the stick.
Looks like Charlie Kirk's a bit of a liar. Looks like Charlie Kirk can't be bothered to read the United States Constitution. Looks like Charlie Kirk, not only a reject for West Point, an embarrassment for the American people, doesn't love the country, doesn't understand the country, doesn't know a damn thing about the country. Sit down and shut up, Charlie. No one buys your BS. All right, well, let's move on. One more story. I know I'm going over, but I can't help myself. I really want to get through this Mitch McConnell story. Because this is what the right wing is really about, okay? Mitch McConnell is salivating over the thought of Americans running out of money and becoming so desperate for survival that they are free and open to be exploited by corporations who will treat them poorly and pay them so meager, like such meager wages they won't even be able to pay their bills. That's what Mitch McConnell is salivating over as we speak. Why do I say that? Well, he recently gave a speech and he was talking about the labor shortage, okay? And he wanted to express some optimism about the labor shortage. For anyone who's concerned about all these positions that are going unfilled, he says, you've got a whole lot of people sitting on the sidelines because frankly, they're flush for the moment. They're flush for the moment. Meaning they have so much money they don't know what to do, so they're not working. What we've got to hope is once they run out of money, they'll start concluding it's better to work than not to work. This is how detached from reality our politicians are. And I say our politicians because remember, there were also some corporate Democrats who wanted unemployment benefits to end prematurely in the middle of a global pandemic. So Americans who felt unsafe going back to work would have no choice. They would be desperate and they would take any job regardless of what the risk would be to both their health and honestly their minds. Going to work every day with that fear of getting sick with coronavirus, not a good feeling. But let's get back to Mitch McConnell's argument here. So Republicans have long blamed, get a load of this, have long blamed that $1,400 direct payment to Americans for worsening inflation and helping keep people out of the workforce. No, let that sink in for a minute. $1,400 won't even cover half of the rent in most metropolitan areas of the country for 1 month. For 1 month. Homeboy's cashing checks from his corporate donors. He's trading individual stocks based on insider information, which we would go to prison for, but senators get to do it with impunity, of course. He thinks that $1,400 from like literally 2 years ago is what's persuading Americans to not work? What world does this guy live in? No, by the way, not a word about the Federal Reserve printing money, handing it over to corporations, handing it over to private equity firms. Not a word about how that led to record inflation for assets, record inflation in the housing market, record inflation, and I say inflation, but I mean, look, honestly, the reason why we're experiencing turbulence right now in the stock market is because the value of those shares are not, like based on nothing. It's not based on productivity, it's not based on sales, it's not based on the health of these corporations. It's based on corporate stock buybacks that happened with money that was provided by the Federal Reserve. Not a word about that, because that helps his stock portfolio. Mitch McConnell's chillin'. He loves those corporate stock buybacks, loves it. He's heavily invested. But he's super salty about that $1,400 you got from the federal government years ago. We got to find a way to make them desperate. Got to pave the way for these corporate executives to exploit them. That's who Mitch McConnell is. That's right-wing populism for you. Disgusting. By the way, unemployment as we speak sits at a historic low of 3.6%. What is he talking about? Now, Moody's Analytics estimates that households did in fact build up extra cash, totaling $2.6 trillion from the beginning of the pandemic through the end of 2021. But let's also consider the fact that savings increased generally, right? Like they're not looking at a specific group of American workers. They're not looking at minimum wage workers and saying like, whoa, wow, look at this. During the pandemic, minimum wage workers were really stacking the cash. No, that generally speaking, Americans, including those who were lucky enough to work from home, were able to save a little extra money because where would they spend it? Everything was shut down. Okay, but what is the situation today? Because remember, inflation is the other thing that these right-wingers complain about day in, day out. Understandably, inflation is hurting everybody, right? Okay, we should probably focus on corporations that have just decided to arbitrarily price gouge us so they can increase their corporate profits. Not a word about that from Mitch McConnell either. But let's take a look at the financial health of ordinary Americans today. So there have been some Americans who quit their jobs. Over the past 2 years, Americans have been quitting jobs at near record rates, but hiring and job openings remain strong. That indicates that many people are quitting for higher paying jobs, good for them, especially in low wage industries and the service sector, which seems to have struggled the most to hire and retain workers. Maybe they should consider paying their workers more to entice them to go back to their restaurants or to whatever service industry job they previously had. Turns out that they found work that pays them better. Free market, baby, what happened? Suddenly when the free market is used to the advantage of labor, don't love it so much anymore. Let's make them desperate so they have no choice but to go back to jobs where they're not paid enough and they're treated poorly. But let's get to the real heart of what's encouraging Mitch McConnell's dumb argument here. Kentucky, McConnell's home state, was briefly the epicenter of the Great Resignation. The sheer number of workers quitting and leaving the workforce was powered by structural conditions that existed long before the pandemic and were exacerbated by COVID-19. That includes lack of affordable childcare, a low minimum wage, and worries over safety during a still raging pandemic. Let's focus on minimum wage and childcare. If you've got kids to take care of, and you also have a minimum wage job, you can't afford childcare. It makes a lot more sense for you to stay home and be with your kids. Because again, your wages wouldn't even cover the childcare necessary for you to go to work. Mitch McConnell in that same speech bragged about defeating Build Back Better, which was the social spending bill that would have provided a social safety net for people, but more importantly, it would have provided childcare for Americans. So if they choose to go back to work, they could easily do so. He bragged about defeating that in the same speech. So which one is it? Do you want people to go back to work? Because if you do, a great way for you to use your position of power is to support them in that effort. But people like Mitch McConnell actively work against the American people. And what's amazing about all of this is the fact that even the United States Chamber of Commerce, the very business interests that fund these disgusting politicians who work against us on a daily basis, realizes, man, childcare is a little bit of a problem. Our businesses are having a little bit of an issue getting people back to work because childcare. What are we gonna do? Don't believe me? Here's a headline from a study done by the United States Chamber of Commerce. Data deep dive. A decline of women in the workforce. Data show that women who left the labor force during the pandemic, often to take on childcare duties, have not yet returned. Wow, what a shocker. Let's take a look at some of the data provided by this US Chamber of Commerce study. Many women resigned their careers due to lack of childcare. 58% of parents unable to find childcare, 26% of parents unable to afford childcare. In the last 2 years, 16,000 childcare centers were forced to close their doors, and many more were operating at limited capacity. This diminished the accessibility and affordability of childcare across the nation. In many cases, parents, most often women, stayed home to care for their children. Half of all workers and nearly 60% of parents cite lack of childcare as their reason for leaving the workforce. So go ahead and brag about defeating social spending programs that support families and make it easier for people to go back to work, Mitch. But you don't then get to turn around and paint people as lazy individuals who are just sitting on the sidelines, people who should be punished because they're allegedly flushed with cash. We live in America. There's only a few people at the very top who are flushed with cash. The rest of us are already either dealing with bankruptcy or are living on the edge or are just one health emergency away from joining those going through bankruptcy. That's what America's about. Unlike you, Mitch McConnell, ordinary Americans are not privy to insider information that they can just easily trade individual stocks on. So if that story made you angry, I feel you. Want to provide a little bit of relief by going to the final video here. Let's go to video D2. This will make you feel better, then we'll go to break. Just illustrative of leadership in this country in every way. Doesn't matter if you're talking about Democrats or Republicans. Just absolute goofs, absolute lunatics, people who don't fight for us, people who don't work on our behalf, people who fight against us and just use their position of power to enrich themselves. That's who Mitch McConnell is. We gotta take a break. John Iadarola joins me for the second hour. We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk, and I'll see you soon.